Today, we are having a very interesting guest who is sitting in South Korea, Seoul, but is not from South Korea, Seoul. So, we are going to talk about export to South Korea. But first of all, I would like you to introduce yourself and the company you are running.
Victoria, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Elias Peterle. As you mentioned, I'm originally from Germany and I'm working for the company Novak Partner, which is a boutique advisory and executive search firm here based in Seoul, South Korea.
Nice. How long have you guys been running this business?
Basically, I came the first time to Korea in 2007. Back then, in a different capacity, I was working for a German company who has set up a joint venture in Korea, and I was tasked with basically supporting the activities, the joint venture, but then also the company was growing and the activities in Korea was building some solar parks in Korea in the early years. I have worked in renewable energy until 2012 before moving basically to Novak Partner in the consulting business. One reason was because I have seen a lot of good things and I have seen a lot of interesting things what foreign companies do and should maybe not do. And I thought in the consulting field, I can use my knowledge to help foreign businesses to avoid missteps. And I met early on in 2008 my colleague and owner of Novak Partner, Mr. Joachim Novak. He is a German lawyer by training, and he came in Korea in 1997. And he is also still working in the capacity of German lawyer with the Korean law firm Deriuk and Archu. And the Novak Partner was his idea to support foreign businesses in Korea with non-legal and non-tax advising services. As he so many times, he can help on the legal side, set up the business, make sure that there are the correct contracts, etc. But often companies do need more support, especially in the initial stage of the market entry.
How easy was this decision for you to stay in Korea?
Oh, that was not too difficult because after having worked here first in renewable energy and I was at the beginning in an expat constellation, but then I localized rather fast because I realized Korea is a country with a lot of opportunities, but Korea is also a place where the longer you stay in, the more valuable you are for basically the company because it's a lot about gaining experience and then basically utilizing this experience for the company or for our clients.
Nice. So let's go into the country entry. What do you think? Who should consider South Korea as the target market? What kind of businesses?
Korea is a very diverse and interesting market. When looking a little bit on the industry and manufacturing profile, I would very much actually compare it with a lot of the Central European countries. We do have a very diverse industry, starting with oil and gas, semiconductor, automotive, electronics, up to now more the soft industries like content generation, movie making, K-pop is one of the biggest topics. So we are having a very diverse landscape. And so it's rather difficult to say that there is a specific industry which is highlighting, of course, semiconductor and automotive, very big, but they're also very established. And it really depends on the niche or the industry aspect where the customer is in. It's maybe also rather basically making the exclusion part who should maybe not come to Korea.
That's what I was.
Korea is very diverse. So I would say actually most companies which do think have a good product to a fair price could try it in the Korean market. But for example, there are some industries which are becoming seemingly more and more difficult with the market entry. I don't want to say Korea intentionally basically want to block the access, but more or less Korea has actually learned from the Americas and the European Union, which are very protective when other countries try to import. Also, Korea basically has set up rules and regulation and certification requirements when importing or exporting to Korea.
Exactly. So who might find South Korea as not suitable market? Can you maybe bring something up?
I would say it needs to be really considered, for example, for niche manufacturers, for example, for medical devices, because the medical device registration process is very complicated. Drugs and pharmaceutical, it's on one side an interesting market, but again, if it's a niche product, it may be very complex and questionable if profitability can be generated fast. Then we have general categories. Usually the product should be something with a unique selling point and with a certain appeal. If it's too mainstream, then basically really then the price competitiveness must be really good. And there many times, unfortunately, European products losing competitiveness compared to other basically manufacturers in Asia.
But what about the size of the business? Do you see any difference if it's larger business or is it a really small business who is thinking about expanding to South Korean markets? Is there anything?
Of course, we always recommend that the customer itself need to have a certain awareness of that the Korean market is a very intense market, meaning needs to have a certain level of attention as well as basically engagement. And I don't want to say this is depending then on a specific company size, because we have really seen even very small companies doing quite well, but there they really try to engage and are highly motivated to engage. And then things may work out rather well. On the other side, we have also seen mid-size or large-size companies which basically want to come to Korea, but may have delegated the task to some mid-management person who may not be that much interested, or overall the market focus is on different countries or segments, and then the energy for supporting a market entry might be then not as strong as it should be, and then it's rather challenging. So I don't want to say it's depending on the size, more on the willingness to really understand when entering the Korean market. It does require a certain amount of energy. Of course, you can theoretically also separate those things in different industries. Some products need less energy and some industries need more energy. But in general, let's say it's not like you go from Spain to Italy or you go from Belgium to Poland. The distance and then coming from Europe to Korea is just way larger. And you have a cultural distance. You have, in my opinion, the most significant part is the language barrier, which needs to be considered. And then really regulatory requirements. There are nowadays many products and even services which you need to basically keep in mind, all the regulatory framework on both sides.
Nice, very interesting. So if thinking about the South Korean market, take it as a full-time, full attention project, not something you do just by side of everything else.
Yes, so basically there should be somebody in the company basically focusing on the business in a very high capacity function. Especially important is response time also, where the market requires attention, and attention means also basically response to changes or to requests. The most frustrating point, what we do see very frequent, but I don't think that has something to do with Korea in particular, but many times that European headquarters are usually tentative in rather responding slow, sometimes contributed to holidays or personal needs. And there should be always then a designated substitute or proxy who can take care of requests. And even if it's at least responding, sorry, we are basically busy, but we are currently looking into your request and getting back to you soon. But not good to basically not be reachable for a certain period of time.
I see. So there has to be willingness to adjust, kind of change of mindset when it comes to this project here, the South Korea project. So
yeah, it's always the question of what is mindset? Mindset is always an individual point. I have seen very hardworking people from all nationalities, I would say. It's just really the level of engagement just needs to be higher. And basically big corporations do have many times the problem if they have multiple departments to engage or get confirmations or from during processes, etc. that it must be basically aware already at the beginning, once you want to do something, that you need to also streamline the processes. I had very interesting projects where I just made sure from the beginning to say, guys, when we now start something, you need to be ready. You need to have your approval processes ready, because once we have a situation where we basically need the confirmation should come out within 24 hours. And it should not be the case that then the whole approval machinery starts in the headquarters and it may take another 2 weeks.
That is very valuable information. Thank
Yeah.
you. So we are actually getting into the business culture. We are going to cover it slightly. We don't go too
Yeah.
deeply into it, but still, what stands out compared to other cultures that you have worked with? Of course, you can compare with the German business culture, but maybe you have some more comparing points.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because it took for me also a long time basically to basically have the good answer, because let's say just purely academically, we usually try to distinguish cultures in a kind of merchant culture. For example, the Dutch are very known for being merchant and traders for centuries, and looking now at Germany or other Central European countries, you have the craftsmanship culture where precision and craftsmanship has been very high valued. And there you see some certain traits. And for example, looking at Japan, most would basically identify Japan as a craftsmanship culture and not that much as a merchant culture. But when it comes to Korea, actually felt it's very difficult to categorize. And in my opinion, it's not possible to categorize. Rather, you need to restructure that in Korea. You have different corporate levels which behave all on their own, where you can categorize the chaebols, the big Korean conglomerates, the Samsung, LGs, the SK and the Hyundais, which do have their own corporate management style, and they themselves are also acting slightly different from each other. Now, I would say the recent years, there's a certain trend of internationalization going on, but generally they do have their own way of working in a certain way. And then you have Korean mid-sized companies and Korean small-sized companies. And I would say the small-sized companies, highly likely similar again to most other countries. When you directly talk with the owner, who is the CEO, then the engagement level and the response time and the deal making might be way more personal and way faster. And the bigger the company is, the more complex it is, the more formal it gets. And also nowadays, actually very much bureaucratic. That's also then the fourth part. For example, dealing with the governments. We do still see a lot of foreign companies dealing with the Korean government and selling products and services also, which is also becoming very bureaucratic, where in the past, I would say Korea was known for basically, if there is not an ideal solution, we will find always a way to make it work, to becoming nowadays also very detailed focused and contract obeying, where really the paperwork must be in order and 100% correct. Otherwise, the Korean counterparty will basically challenge that in their own favor.
Yes, yeah. Okay. When we think about the Korean, South Korean, Japanese, and Chinese business cultures, or as target markets, I know we are generalizing here like big time, but still, would you mention the main values or main differences where Korea stands out? China and Japan, they have so very different ways of doing things, but can you go into that a little bit?
As you mentioned, it's a very challenging question, and we usually always recommend not comparing any of the three with each other, because I would say almost the same for Europe. If you compare now French, Germans, and Italians, it will be also very difficult.
But still possible.
Yeah, but also the same as, let's say, stick with the sample French, German, and Italy. Undoubtedly, we all share common roots and we all share a certain language basis which links the nations. And I would say there are similar similarities, of course, with China, Korea, and Japan. Fundamentally, I would say they are more disconnected from each other than most of the European countries, I would say, contributing to the fact that it's not physically an island here in Korea, but theoretically it was always in a very tight position. And yet Japan is an island where the cultures itself very much develop in their own way and have a clear personal identity. Also, Korea was the only country which really departed from the traditional language forms and basically has developed their own alphabet and their
Yes.
own language structure, which is somewhat unique and known to be the first really scientifically developed language, which makes it also a somewhat more unique positioning out of the three. Business-wise, I would say, yeah, similar like in Europe, they share all somewhat commonalities, but they share also some certain differences. What I personally like about Korea is the fact that they're having a certain drive and a certain motivation to look into new things, to learn, and also to partner, which is a very positive thing. But I must also say this is a very limited view from my side because I have not really much engaged with China business or business in the past.
Great, thank you. So when we go now into the export side, when there is a business, it doesn't really matter the size, maybe that much, but let's say mid-sized business from anywhere, they feel that, okay, I guess South Korean market is something for us. What should they do as the next step? Because I can see often businesses are like, we want to go to that market. We feel it can be for us, but I don't know where to start, who to contact, how to start the research. Taken that they are not big corporations, have funds for big time analysis.
Honestly speaking, I would say there are multiple ways to approach this. What we see very often that people approach the scenario via their own network from business partners who usually recommend law firms can help. But depending on the nationality, I think embassies and commercial chambers could be a good starting point. But we have seen that depending on the country, every country may have different structures when it comes to export support. The other areas, of course, working with the private sector, like companies like Novak and Partner, for doing an initial market research and assessment. Other areas could be basically, depending, of course, highly on the product, visiting just Korea for certain trade fairs. Korea is a very trade fair heavy country, where most industry sectors do have their own trade fairs and shows to get a first market feeling. But definitely, I do recommend every company who is coming to Korea to do their homework, do their market research, to reach out to their relevant, basically, trade assistant bodies, which most countries do have, but also basically chambers of commerce, which also most European countries do have a chamber or a business association in Korea, which can serve as a first point for information. Korean websites, they are becoming more international, but still it's usually very difficult for somebody who is not having access to a Korean speaker
Yeah.
to basically get valuable information. And working there with Google Translate, for example, is still rather difficult to come to a good or conclusive result.
It is. That's why we at the two global markets, we have created a contact list for several countries, of course, and South Korea is one of them. And we had a local partner, of course, finding us the information. Novak Partners is included there as country entry experts. We have there also SEO experts, legal experts, you name it, what you need for expanding to another country. We have the experts listed up there. And of course, as we know, South Korea is not Google-based, search engine-based country. So Naver is the platform to be for the local businesses. So in our list, our criteria was that the business needs to have the website in both local language, but also in English, so that these people can get in touch with experts with ease. So this list with the country entry experts can give information about the overall information about culture, business culture, about the languages, because it's pretty specific in South Korea. We have a separate video about it with the translator expert in that field. It's very interesting. So you are one of the entry points to start with. Just pick up the phone or send an email and
Yes, so basically we are happy to help and facilitate. From my point of view, it's always important when companies have an interest to reach out and especially be clear in what they would like and how they would structure it, because that helps us or any other consultant really to make the right assessment. Without basically this, it's really sometimes difficult to give the correct advice. And you mentioned earlier neighbor, and yes, Korea is a non-Google country, let's so to say. Naver is one of the largest firms. There's Kakao Dow, the other two major players in the industry when it comes to search. But it must be said that many times the Naver, for example, are still working slightly different than a Google, because Google is basically like an internet crawler gathering the information, while Naver is an indexer, which basically requires that theoretically you need to feed them to get the right results or to be visible.
Right.
On the other note, when it comes to the question of when entering the Korean market, often the question is basically, do you need a Korean website? Of course, this will depend highly on the product as well. Somebody would have asked me 15 years ago, I would have said it's less important, while in Europe it was already very important. But nowadays, I think it's rather very important to be present also with a Korean website. But there, for example, a very big difference in Korea to most European countries. Korea, most companies don't have their own web shop, while in Europe, most companies which are basically having products which are sold over the internet are usually may have their own web shop as well, which is a very interesting structure. And most companies prefer here the big e-commerce channels to basically sell products via the internet or online.
Right. There's the whole ecosystem built around it for fast delivery, ease of ordering and everything. So there you need special experts to help out. Also with Naver in our list too, we have experts who are specialized on indexing businesses on Naver and making the ones who want to expand to Korean and visible also on Naver, also in Korean language, which is really important. Let's go to more details when it comes to distribution and that kind of ecosystem, because there is a little bit of mystery around the sales agents and wholesalers and distribution system in South Korea. Can you give us a slight overview? How is it structured?
Yeah,
What we
happy
think
to do.
about?
Again, it depends really very much on the industry. But for example, the perfect industry is usually food and beverage and consumer products, with basically going over the retail. And there are many times, yes, you do have a distributor structure where you traditionally have either an importer who is at the same time a distributor, or an importer who is then selling to maybe sub-distributors, who is then basically selling them to the wholesalers. Very important when it now looking at the big supermarket chains. We do have multiple, Shinsegae to mention one, and Lotte. They are so big many times. If you start at the beginning and you have smaller products, many times they even don't like to deal directly with overseas clients, because listing every overseas company as a supplier, they rather prefer that they go to an existing supplier they have in Korea and basically place the products with them. That is a very, very common structure. And of course, those distributor selections should be carefully done. There, for example, we can also do support on those cases with background checks and reference check, but it should be always understood. Look at your partner first, and you should always do business with somebody who has substantial level of experience and can prove the experience they have. Because otherwise, you need to be careful that you are stuck. Korea is a very competitive market, and it's very common that distributors and importers will request for exclusivity. We would always say, be careful, and
Yes.
exclusivity should always come with a counterbalance that you say, if exclusivity, then there must be a certain order quantity per month, per quarter, per year. Otherwise, it's questionable if that makes sense, because also distributors may just then block the market for a certain period of time if you assign somebody exclusivity, but you have difficulties to basically revoke it or change the distributor.
When we go now back to the very basics, because the terms actually can differ from different parts of the world, the Americas, Europe, and Asia. Let's say when we talk about what are the key difference between distributors, sales agents, retailers, and wholesalers in South Korea.
I mean,
Yeah.
the Korean law, interestingly, is very much similar to Central European because it was introduced when during the Japanese occupation, and shares a lot of similarities with the German law on that point, where, of course, an agent is usually defined by a person who is introducing the business and getting a commission. So basically, many times they are not the direct importer, and they are not basically the person who are then included into the transaction. Rather, they just make sure that the overseas parties and the Korean distributor or wholesaler are making a business and then getting a commission from the transaction. And this is a scheme which I would say was very, very common in the past, but fading somewhat away in Korea. There are more either direct engagement or the typical distributor accounts. And a distributor is a company which buys the products on their own risk and selling it to whatever customer they do have. And the fundamentals between it can be quite significant, because the question is always who is the importer and who must take care of importing the product. Because there might be then the licensing requirements, certification requirements, shipping and import related topics included as well, which of course everybody tries to avoid and may push back to the manufacturer or to the supplier. Therefore, it somewhat really depends on the product and the industry, what works best. We do see nowadays, same like in Europe, actually, that a lot of companies try to sell products from overseas directly to Korean end customers.
Okay.
Korea has currently still the same regulation or similar regulation like in Europe, where below a certain amount, basically it's duty free and can be imported in most regards without any hesitation. But we see always significant issues with some electronic devices, especially our communication devices, because of the license requirements. And I assume that Korea will also highly likely consider, same like the European Union, to change this maybe in the mid to distant future, that those direct online sales or direct sales to consumers may be more difficult, or the amount may be reduced significantly.
So does it work also in Korea, so that once you get your food between the door, you are halfway in, so you have to further. Let's say, can it be a strategy where a company finds smaller retailers who are ready to take in their product, and that would help them to then spread further? Or is it even that easy to get your products to these smaller retailers' selection?
Let's say that that's a very good question, but again, it depends highly on the industry. I think Korea is a very good test bed, and in order to have a certain stable supply, every angle should be considered. But for example, we do see companies who said we have such a good product, we don't want to go even in the retail. We just want to be in the e-commerce, because we know that basically this will work for us. And we are not actually that interested in being in a shelf. The retailers itself, depending then on the company, they are more or less seeing themselves as a space rental institution, so to say. That means basically bring your product in. You can have a certain space in the shelf, but if your turnover is too low, then basically it will be automatically not having the space in the future. But this is now more like food and beverage and other consumer products. But for example, when it comes to technical products, it's a completely different story. In the past, we saw a lot of distributors and agents for technical components and products, very in all industries, being automotive, household, other products, which is somewhat fading away, in my opinion, for two reasons. Because on one side, you have the distributor or agent dilemma. Once basically the turnover is getting bigger and bigger, then many of the manufacturers consider basically, does it make sense to have there still an agent or come directly? Because the direct market access usually can also have some benefits. And the other part is many times the distributor may focus on profit maximization instead of turnover maximization, while basically a manufacturer is always interested rather in a higher turnover and a lower profit of the distributor, which also can create a dilemma situation. That's why many times we would recommend for products which have a very high level of requirement for technical explanation or for service or both, that it may be considered to come directly or basically having a more closer engagement in the Korean market to first be directly present in the market, also with regard to customer feedback, because an agent and a distributor may filter to some extent the information flow. And for many companies, it's also important to hear maybe the not so good stories or the problems in the market to make adjustments. And see the real potential behind it, what the market can really do. We have seen many customers of ours in the past who may have supplied to Korea a very long time, but have not noticed, for example, that other competitors have been more aggressive in Korea and the market was shrinking and shrinking. And those kind of information, it's very difficult to get if you are not basically deeply engaged in the market. And then you may also miss the chance to adjust or react accordingly to keep the competition in a certain balance.
Yeah. But let's take the human action side now. How often should actually exporters visit South Korea and their partners there? So to keep close eye on the developments and
communication is key in every society, and I think the more frequent, the better it is. I would also strongly recommend to adjust to local communication style, meaning downloading Kakao, for example, where there's a local messenger, which is, I think, having here a saturation or penetration level of 90-something% or 99%. And that's tool for communication and to check in with partners, with customers, with contact points in Korea on a very direct as well as casual way, which I think helps stay connected. Of course, the personal connection itself is very valuable as well. So basically meeting in person should also be considered often, but it depends again quite on the occasion and on the relationship. So in many regards, I think at least depending on the engagement level, but once a year might be very advised for the most. If the business volume is rather good and the product cycle may be rather fast or updates rather frequent, then also a higher frequency could be good. But definitely the wrong approach would be basically every 3 or 5 years saying everything is going well and doing helicopter management, just flying in, making a bit of dust and disappearing again for 5 years is the wrong approach.
I could imagine it's a good idea to attend fairs, even as a guest, attend different events just to get the feeling of the market, the feeling of the culture, the feeling you pick up different things. Okay, I should learn about that a little bit more. I should get into that a little bit more. I should get to know these people better. So really engage not only on that particular task, but also overall in the Korean culture and business culture and ecosystem. I guess that would be hugely beneficial. Yeah.
No, we do also recommend Korean language, for example, is a very difficult topic. On the other side, as mentioned, it's an alphabet. So you can actually learn it, in my opinion, almost on the fly. So most people really can absorb the alphabet very fast, and that's a good starting point. And just try to learn the most common 5-10 basically vocabularies to say hello, say thank you, etc. I think then it's a very important and meaningful gesture to the Korean counterparty, as well as it gives the possibility to engage on a different level. And despite the fact that when you learn the alphabet that you may not understand everything, but I heard, and also for myself, it may help you significantly even to navigate or to start reading a little bit, and out of sudden, oh, I've heard that before, oh, that's a ramen place, I will want to go there, or etc. You can maybe identify much more.
It is true. I learned the Korean alphabet for several years ago, but this
Yeah.
time in May when I was in Seoul, it was such a pleasure. I could just read the signs. I could navigate. That's true. I just want to demystify the Korean alphabet a little bit because most Westerners, let's say, believe it's extremely difficult to learn because we hear all about this Chinese and the Japanese and all these different meanings behind the symbols. But it's totally different with the Korean alphabet. It's so learnable. It's phonetic. Just do it and you will thank yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. We have
Yeah.
24 basically characters, which rather simple to learn. Of course, you may have some combinations which are slightly more difficult to pronounce, but the first step is very important.
Yes. A little bit about brand awareness. How important is it when it comes to B2C, but also B2B? So we are coming here from Europe or from the Americas or Africa with completely new products, new brands. No one knows about them.
Definitely a very important question. On one side, the company should not over-exaggerate their positioning. We have sometimes seen companies saying, hey, we are globally so big, but we are not in Korea. But we so great, so we must be successful. So I would always, on one side, recommend a certain level of modesty behind it to say, hey, first make your homework and be basically not too energetic on that part. On the other part, especially in consumer products, every brand, every company should have a proper story to tell, and the more the better. And in the best way, also nowadays, basically transferring the message with the social media tools which are known in the Western world. Korea is there no different. Korea uses a lot of Western platforms in parallel to the Korean platforms. Instagram, for example, is rather strong in Korea. Facebook, not really. LinkedIn to some extent, but also Kakao and Naver do have their own platforms for some content distribution. And telling stories is an important factor. Social contribution is also to some extent an important factor, where also Korean companies do make many times campaign a social awareness factor. Combining it, corporate social responsibility is becoming also a more important topic. Don't want to say CO2 neutrality is starting here. It's not yet a big thing, but overall the awareness for environmental friendly products, for healthy products is significantly increasing also in Korea.
Sephora is one of the best companies that actually had burned their feet pretty strongly in South Korea. I know they just closed down many stores and they just have a few left because Olivia is their main competition in South Korea and it was way too strong to beat. So here, that's probably one of the examples of we are Sephora, we are coming here, we take the market, but it didn't really happen.
Yeah, or the other one in the past, and I don't recall the name. It was not Target. It was the UK supermarket chain. Forgot the name. They were also very aggressive in the 90s and early 2000s, and it was also not as successful. The cosmetic industry is just a very challenging environment, I would say. You have Amore Pacific is now a billion-dollar business, so much local competition in addition to the global competition. And everybody's fighting for the same consumer base. And this is rather difficult. But on the other side, a good example might be Costco from the US. Costco is a supermarket chain which is successful in Korea. And actually the biggest store by turnover, I think, is located in Korea because of the density of the population. That's an easy topic. And they are doing well. IKEA is also a topic to mention. They had a little bit of a rough start, but I think now they have 3 or 4 stores open already. If you manage things well, the Korean consumer base is usually very interested in new products, innovative
Mhm.
products from overseas. Definitely there are areas where European products still fit in. I still hope that an Aldi or Lidl would come because that would be an interesting competition to the local food supermarket chains. May help also to push the inflation a little bit down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Branding itself is a very important topic, and it should be just managed nicely, and it should be also managed with the sufficient respect. Meaning, basically, for example, when a Siemens or Bosch or ABB comes to a Samsung and LG, they understand each other and they have a certain level, and should be also always considered that the local side may be in a quite good position as well.
Yes.
As mentioned, yeah, with a certain level of modesty.
Oh, I would like to go into that more. And also sustainability is something really to discuss. As I'm sitting here in Sweden and working with the Danish market. So here the sustainability is just the thing to talk about, but also the view of the Nordic products and Nordic brands in South Korea would be interesting to discuss. But we don't have time right now. I would wrap up actually with one really interesting topic, which is the negotiations and the time that it takes to close the deals, the decision making.
Yeah.
How does it work in
I
Korea?
mean, with negotiations, it's always a very interesting topic. I would say there are some certain cultural aspects behind. I would say most Western nations and societies are seeking for the dual win, whereby we considering very much the counterparty in the same way how we consider ourselves. Many times, I would say in Korea, unintentionally, the position of the Korean counterparties are many times very strong and therefore could overpower the Western parties quite a bit. Where I say you need to be ready to basically stand your grounds and be clear what you like to want, also from the foreign side, and not expect the Korean party may also think about your interest too much. It's rather maybe the fact that everybody should think about their own position by themselves. And if both parties are doing so, then the outcome might be also mutually balanced and both parties basically have their fair deal, which is a very important point. Also, Korea is known for challenging sometimes the position over and over again, which is just strategy of negotiation. It's also important to say basically up to this point and no further, to mark basically a point of a negotiation to say now this is the maximum we can do. Lastly, consider a little bit more time, but not be afraid to also pause or basically stop a negotiation. Meaning, if you're not satisfied with something, it's maybe better to say, okay, we stop here and take a break and then revisit an hour later or the next day to finalize the part instead of just coming to Korea for one day and having just a couple of hours for closing the deal. That may work in your disadvantage because then you say, oh, I'm not happy with the situation, but my flight is leaving. So I just say yes, which would be not the right decision then to say yes in this moment, rather say, okay, no, maybe I need to stay one more day to finalize things.
But the decision making as such, is it rather a lengthy process in Korea?
It can be, that's another good point. The main point is always with whom you are talking and negotiating. Would not, if this is different to other societies, I would say in all societies, we would like to always talk to the decision maker. And if you directly talk with the decision maker, the process may be faster, of course, but this is not always the case. Fundamental principle is usually, and this is not only valid for Korea, in the best circumstances, the person who is negotiating is not the person who is making the decision. And I think this is also counting for the Western world. But it's important to understand who is who to basically also consider this in the negotiation process to say from the beginning, okay, we make now the basic strategy, we agree to the main point, but then you need to basically internally go up the ladder to get the approval in a certain time frame, etc. Because it's not all the time possible to demand that maybe the owner of the company or the CEO of Samsung himself or the SK, etc., is coming and signing.
Obviously.
an agreement. So it's important to basically be aware of the structure. And then the decision can be made rather fast, but also depending on the company size, it could take some time.
Be interesting to know the decision. Is it made by one person or a small group, or do they need to get the approval and consensus of a large group of people?
I would say it's depending somewhat on the structure of the company, but to very vast majority, it's made by a single person, usually the owner or the CEO of the company. And even for big corporations, it's usually very up management and usually not the lower mid management who can make a decision. When it comes to government related topic, Korea has a very advanced public procurement system. It's all electronic and significant rule book behind it. And they're also basically the process may take them quite some time, tendering process and get selected in a tender, which is for foreign parties not completely impossible. And foreign parties are allowed to participate also in Korean tenders. But that might be a lengthy process and requiring, of course, then a local touch when it comes to communication and submission of documents, for example.
Definitely, local touch is important. The last question. Let's say the first meeting is getting to an end and the answer will be, let's continue our talks, or nothing's going to happen here. We're not interested. How are these decisions or feelings or thoughts expressed? Clearly or through the flowers?
I would say direct approach would be maybe inappropriate if it's a no. I would recommend not being too aggressive in rejecting a business proposal that maybe can have time for the next day. You also never want to burn bridges, and rather a delayed approach might be the right way to do it. But it could be also, honestly, depending again on the company which you're dealing with. When you deal with the big conglomerates, they can be really direct as well and simply say, sorry, you have not the right product, not the right technology. We don't have further more time for you. So the culture is changing to some extent. And also, again, it's depending highly on the business partner. But my overall recommendation there is always act in the same way how you would act in your home country. You would always be you want to be always professional. You want to always be having a certain level of politeness. If you maintain the same approach in Korea, it's very unlikely that the person will have any missteps and still can manage every situation in a just adequate and professional way.
Do you have anything else you would add? Maybe when thinking a little bit in the direction of what to avoid.
Making fast decisions. Don't be too hasty. I would call it the honeymoon effect. Many times people come to Korea and see the country, see the business partners and say, hey, yeah, everything perfect, everything great. Maybe going drinking, norebang, singing, etc. And then having those kind of honeymoon feeling and maybe saying way too far yes to exclusivity or to a certain contract arrangement or to an engagement or hiring a person. Rather be also modest, take your time to make the decision, reconfirm maybe the situation from somebody from a similar business network, from chambers, from professionals who are in the country, if the strategy makes sense, if the approach is right. Do certain basically due diligence and background checks to avoid any decision which is can be very expensive in some cases. The other thing is really when engaging in the Korean market, I would always recommending also your own check. What is the potential target turnover to expect, and maybe also based on cross-referencing competitive products or how the market is structured. If the turnover is expected to be low, let's say in the area of 200,000 to 300,000 euro, I would almost recommend stay at home. The turnover and the engagement might be too low to justify all the effort basically to come to a country 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 kilometers away. If the turnover is in the area of 1, 2, 3, 4 billion euro, then basically a kind of agency partner distributor model, engaging a local person in the country could be considered. as the best option. And many times from 5 million and upwards, an own subsidiary could be the right choice, where you then have, of course, on one side, a higher fixed costs, but on the other side, basically a market engagement, which is fully transparent and controllable and gives the foreign party also basically the options to make adjustments faster and engage in a direct way. This is not specific to Korea itself, but I would say also in other European countries, it's just a different relationship. If you are engaged as an employee and employer, or if you're an external agent or distributor,
Sure.
which may significantly then impact also the work in the country itself.
Very good. Thank you. Any final thoughts?
Victoria, no, from my side, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'm always available for you and anybody who is interested in the Korean market. We are usually available on a short notice, and the first half an hour, our consulting is many times free of charge, where we can just look into the situation and what potential solutions are there. And from our side, we can help from very basic market research to full turnkey company setup, including the people and the office and everything. Also support with other auxiliary topics like project or interims managements. And mentioned via our other network, we do have a legal side and also for bookkeeping, accounting, certain partners where we can facilitate quite a lot. Don't want to say all, but we do have quite a vast network. And from now, 12 years experience supporting foreign companies from, I say always, from Spain to Norway, from New Zealand to Canada, in various sectors and industries. We are happy always to share our experience and guide basically interested companies through the process, but also giving honest feedback and having also recommended several times companies to not come to Korea because personally not seeing the right potential, which is the most difficult decision. But saying sometimes, sorry guys, it may be very difficult or not working. It might be more valuable than saying yes all the time.
Just to save their money and energy, and maybe they can put it to some other market that is much more lucrative for them. Yes. We will add information about Novak Partners and the website and everything in the description, everywhere we are publishing this conversation, so that people will have easy access to further information. And also there will be, as mentioned, also our lists available for people who feel that they would like to touch the water before mailing to you or some other experts in the Korean market. So it's a possibility. Thank you so much. It was so informative. I have so many more questions I would love to ask. I could spend another 3 hours, that's for sure, next time maybe. And the next time we will meet up, I hope, for lunch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm happy to have a second part as well sometime in the future.
Yeah.
And also to appreciate the conversation and the very, very good questions. And to welcome you or anybody who is interested in coming to Korea soon in person. So
thank you.
Likewise. Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you. Bye-bye.